What I'm hoping with this message is to some of you, this will be a familiar image. This was, I believe, in our last immersion. I talked about this, the landscape of life, these 4 different ways that we all have stories of encountering the presence of God. We use this imagery of land with lava to be able to depict that. So a quick rundown for those that are new to it. Eruptive moments are those really big types of moments. Maybe it was at a camp or retreat like Fred was talking about earlier, where you came into contact with the presence of the Lord. There was life change out of it. Erosive moments are those really difficult times. It didn't feel like it was ever going to turn into something, but yet in that time frame, you came into the same contact with the same Spirit of God, but through a different means. Earthquake, another kind of negative type moment, but happens really quickly, whereas the erosion moments happen over a long period of time, usually where character is being developed and honed. Earthquake moments, like you're shocked. It's the call in the middle of the night in a way, it was kind of like Elmer getting the call, like, come respond to this. And like, Lord, what are you doing here? You don't always see the presence of God immediately. Oftentimes, at least in my earthquake moments, it feels like, God, where were you? But then later on, you're like, whoa, I could totally see you were in the midst of so many things I just couldn't quite tell. And then excavation, we use that as language to talk about how we use spiritual disciplines on a daily, weekly, monthly basis to mine out the presence of God. So that's the landscape of life tool, just as a way to give you a handle. What I'd love to do is, with this, is some sense of inspiration of all the ways that God may have spoken to you. May have contacted His presence. I want you to go back to, what's the moment of greatest impact that you've had with the Lord? Like, what's a moment where He just showed up and maybe rocked your world or turned your life upside down? For me, I remember, this isn't the greatest, but one of them. It was really early in my spiritual journey. I was hungry and I was searching. I was coming back from Southern California into Central California. There's a giant mountain range that is commonly called the Grapevine there. I was in my 1988 Honda Accord. I had a cassette tape deck in there. I was listening to some mixtapes that my parents had mixed together of like contemporary worship. And I was listening to, oh man, I can't believe, Shout to the Lord. I don't know at this point before this that I worshiped. I listened to music, but I don't know that I worshiped before this, just to give you like the spectrum of my journey. But I remember descending the hill, that song coming on, and it's a beautiful, when the skies are clean there, and you see that big fruitful valley, and just, the way the sunlight plays through there. Gosh, something about that song, that moment, the scenery. I didn't have language for it at the time, but now, looking back, what I can tell happened, the Spirit of the Lord came and inhabited that little 1988 Honda Accord, and I was just weeping without having ever really worshiped in a way. Like, just the presence was drawing me so close. I found myself so hungry for something I probably wouldn't even have been able to give language to. But, I knew it was God just doing some amazing things. And I've had a lot of times since then, but that's just one. What's a moment for you? A moment of great encounter? Because what I'm hoping today, and in some ways, that the Lord might take that encounter and then take you deeper. That's what I'm kind of hoping for today. So let me tell you a couple stories about some backpacking that I've done. I'm not a backpacker. I didn't grow up in a family of like Boy Scouts that like took me out. I was outdoors with my grandfather and father hunting, things like that, but I didn't pick up backpacking. But I had a brother-in-law named Phil who said, hey, you should go on the High Sierra Trail. I lived in Central California at the foothills of Sequoia National Park. Mount Whitney is just like in our backyard, basically. Long ways away at the end of the backyard, but it's still there nonetheless. And he says, you should come on this hike. I'm like, I'm not really like a backpacker. He's like, yeah, it's 72 miles. I'm like, yeah, for sure, no. Seriously? Who walks 72 miles? That's ridiculous. and up hills and all that kind of stuff. Sounded so dumb. But, yeah, right. And I'm like, how big are those packs? But he shows me a picture, and I kind of wish I would have maybe even shown you that inspiration picture. But it was a picture that you could only see by getting something like 30 miles in. And I'm like, that exists? And it was the picture of him in this kind of like horseshoe ring looking down just this giant valley, beautiful landscape on the other side. And the picture, I was like, I want to see that place. And so I get all geared up, and we take off. And again, like, I didn't practice. I didn't really warm up. But, like, I can do 72 miles. I want to see this space. There's a group of us that go, a youth pastor that was serving with me at the time, a friend and his son, who is now my son-in-law. He was 10 years old at the time, and I just was there at their wedding last weekend and gave my daughter to this young man that originally walked this High Sierra Trail with us, and we get going, and it was amazing. We get to this place. This is Hamilton Lake, and you're probably at about the 10,000 foot elevation, so you're high up there. It's summer, so you can't quite tell here, like, you know, there's no snowpack that you can see, but this is largely frozen areas for much of the year. This lake was warm enough, I guess you could say, that we swam in it, and we played like little junior high kids, you know, swimming in that lake. We had some really cool moments there. You can see the bowl like that is surrounding there. If you go up to the top of that, that's where we're headed next. We're going to zigzag up a bunch of this, ascend another 1,000 feet. We'll be at 11,000 feet. And this is the next picture. This is Precipice Lake at the top. So you can see the snowpack that's still there, and it just is constantly dripping down. This is a pristine lake. It is so stinking beautiful and clean, high enough elevation. We're not filtering our water. The picture doesn't do it justice because, I mean, you know, it's cropped into something like a box, but I mean, it's just stinking expansive and beautiful. You're now looking back down at Hamilton Lake going, wow, we just climbed a really, really large amount of altitude. This is a little bit wider perspective. I was trying to use panoramic to just take in. I'm down now lower. You can see the color of the water. I mean, it's, again, I can't get words enough. Awesome, majestic, you know, you throw in all these things. It was powerful, and it was spiritual too. Like there was something beautiful about being in the presence of the Lord and just his glory and majesty showing up in this space. I sat down on this rock that was there, and a friend of mine captured this picture, and I'm so grateful because I kind of remember being caught up in that moment. And I'm glad that I didn't know, like, hey, I'm going to go pose down there. This will be a cool one, but like somebody caught it of me, and I'm super grateful for that. This was day 2. We continued on. We ended up going up, you know, and we found places where major rivers that were pouring from the mountain ranges in Central California flow down into the valley. And so we have quite a few rivers that are there. The Kern River being one of them that flows into Bakersfield. And we kind of basically came to its source, which is pretty amazing to think because I had seen the Kern River down below in the valley. I'd watched it falling down rocks and, you know, slides in different areas, but to see it as a trickle is pretty darn cool. You know, I don't know, there's something pretty cool about being in spaces that not very many people go. We continued on. It was a 7-day total trip. We ended up ascending Mount Whitney, the highest point, you know, in the continental U.S., and then we descended Mount Whitney on the other side, landed in Lone Pine, and we had been dreaming about pizza in Lone Pine for so long by then. We're like, dude, I cannot wait. What kind of pizza are you going to get? You know, we're just talking all of those things, but great bonding moments, great views, and great experiences along the way. Let me take you to this scripture, John chapter 7. This is Jesus speaking, and he says this, on the last day, the climax of the festival, Jesus stood and shouted to the crowds, anyone who is thirsty may come to me Anyone who believes in me may come and drink, for the scriptures declare rivers of living water will flow from his heart. When he said living waters, he was speaking of the Spirit, who would be given to everyone believing in him. But the Spirit had not yet been given, because Jesus had not yet entered into his glory. Love the imagery. You get a lot of different comparisons to the way that the Spirit of God operates. Here we get this clear Spirit of God, operating as water. We prayed earlier this morning about the Spirit of God blowing through as wind. We've talked about the Spirit, even in that last message I talked about, like a fire operating. You see those kind of core elements depicted in the way that the Spirit of God works. You would write down somehow, wherever you're taking notes, that phrase, water grows life. In California, where I was hiking, that Kern River, that's this slow trickle at the very top, pouring into really high class rapids on the way down. We have different rivers there than the ones that we have here in Oregon, because it's a semi-arid climate, and so depending upon rainfall, the rivers change quite a bit. And I know that they change here, but the rivers are relatively consistent. So you may go to the Kern River in year 1, and it's hardly anything, if anything, because drought has struck. That's just what happens in a semi-arid environment versus just the places where there's abundant rain. But it's amazing to be able to just see the water flowing from the top, going all the way down. And if you've been through the boring Central Valley, driving between Los Angeles and San Francisco or Sacramento, those long stretches of nothing but just crop after crop after crop, tree after tree after tree after tree. But that valley produces something like 380 different fruits, nuts, and vegetables. And it's the water, because the watershed, idea, the water falls on those Sierra Nevada mountain ranges, and depending upon which side of the mountain peak that it hits, it's either going to flow down into that fruitful valley, or it's going to go onto the other side where there's the Salton Sea. Water still flows there, but it's really dry and deserted there. And so water grows life. I've seen that in my environment. I live now, at the coast, where I had never had to work to maintain roads because of the rainfall that comes in. I have a really fresh appreciation about having driveways that are pitched at the right angle, culverts that divert water where it needs to go, because water is really, really powerful. But if you'll write this down, not only does water grow life, but water, like the scripture says there, represents the Holy Spirit. So if you take that water imagery and place it where the lava once was, you still have these moments of encounter. And I don't know if you've ever thought about this, but I wonder, in what nature did the Spirit of God showed up? Have you been in those times? When I was coming down the mountain, the quality of encounter that I had with the Lord, there was a refreshing that was in it, probably more like the quality of water, but there was a burning to it too. Maybe it was really hot water, I'd found a pool that, what do you call those? The bubbly hot springs. I'd found a hot spring. It's a little like that. I've had other times where, the wind of the Lord might just be blowing through. But again, I just want to take you back to some moments of greatest encounter with the presence of the Lord. And I wonder, how did the Lord show up? What was the quality and nature of his voice at that point? And again, I wonder, how much more might he want to do with that exact encounter? What I've discovered is it's almost like the Lord creates fingerprints in our lives in the way that he uniquely impacts us. And as I've learned to go back and discern his fingerprints of how he's spoken, it speaks so much to my call, to oftentimes my passions, and to discovering what he might be doing next and where he might be leading. I want to take you, this is the core passage that I want to walk through, Ezekiel 47. Thank you. I love this passage. So you've got Ezekiel 47, the prophet has all of these different times that, has beautiful encounters with the Spirit of the Lord, but just this beautiful one of an Old Testament revelation of God showing up in a powerful way. This text says, the man brought me back to the entrance of the temple. This is Ezekiel speaking about this encounter he has with this angelic being. And I saw water coming out from under the threshold of the temple toward the east, for the temple faced east. So the physical temple is what Ezekiel is captured with and seen in his imagination, but something has gone wrong. I don't know if you've ever had a leak show up where it's not supposed to be. We had a Thanksgiving a long time ago. We had just prepped a turkey. I'd cleaned up after all of that. We'd put it in the oven, getting it ready to go deliver to feed some people that were in need of food. And after having cleaned up, Kimberly chastised me and said, why did you let turkey juice get down onto the floor? And I cleaned it up again, and I discovered no matter how many times I wiped this away, it kept coming out. You know, it's bad when water is in the wrong spot and pouring out. And in a way, that's kind of what's happening here. I don't know that it's bad, but it's enough to go, whoa, wait a minute, what's happening? Water's not meant to flow from the inside of the temple. You'll remember the temple structure too in general. You have the outside courts, everybody can come there. And then you keep going in and there's greater levels of a requirement for holiness sake in order to get closer. There's a spot where women aren't allowed any longer in Old Testament practice. And then you get to the Holy of Holies, and it's a spot that really only one person, the high priest, and only once per year is allowed to be able to come. And it's that place of greatest intimacy, greatest presence, where this slow trickle of water is coming out and flowing from the temple. The text goes on from there. It's another image of the temple. You can see the Holy of Holies, and you can kind of see what it might look like. I'll show you different images of this same, or different edits of this same shot, so you can see it flowing a little bit more. The water was coming down from under the south side of the temple, south of the altar. He then brought me out through the north gate, and he led me around the outside to the outer gate facing east, and the water was trickling from the south side. Take you back to my trip, the Kern River. The water at the top, because there's not enough of it, because it hasn't, compiled enough with other water, and it's maybe just bubbling up from a spring itself, or it's captured inside of a lake, it's slow trickle. It might drop a huge amount, but because it's a small volume of water, it's still trickling, but trickling fast. And so I get that imagery that's there close to the source. If you could, write this down. Notice that the water flows outward. The water, again, representing the presence of the Holy Spirit, is flowing from the source of the place of the presence of the Lord, but it's not encapsulated inside of the building and flooding the inside of the building. That'd be cool. That would be an interesting analogy, but I'm captivated that the water and the presence don't stay inside of the building. It goes out. I think that, I remember I was watching when I preached a message like this. It was a different context, but still similar text. I preached that in an African American church, and everybody started going, ooh. They were already anticipating where I was going with that. So you didn't do any of those things. So let me just assume that you're not quite catching what I'm trying to say right there, but the water flowed outward. The presence of the Lord didn't stay inside the house of God. The presence of the Lord left the front door, went out the front door, and went away from where the people of God normally gathered and went outside of that. I think there's something really compelling there. When I look at the ways that we oftentimes do church, again, we do so many things building centric. We do so many things facility centric, land centric. And I noticed that, again, just like Jerry's message about the Missio Dei, the heart of God is always moving out. The text goes on from there. This is verses 3-7. As the man went eastward with a measuring line in his hand, he measured off 1,000 cubits. It's a long ways. And then he led me through water that was ankle deep. So let's keep track of the depth of the water as it flows from the source to the further points. He measured off another 1,000 cubits, another long distance, and he led me through water that was knee deep. He measured off another 1,000, and he led me through water that was up to the waist. Again, you notice what's happening. This makes perfect sense. Nothing supernatural is happening. This is the way that water flows on the earth. It goes from higher places down to lower places. It usually pools up and it gathers. But let's just kind of think through. Like in the beginning, think about a time you've played in the water and it's been ankle deep. It's fun. It's exciting. Oh, it's a little chilly on my toes. You know, or like, oh my goodness, I can't stay in there long. I got to come back to the shore. But it's fun. It's pretty safe. If you're there with your kids or your grandkids, you're keenly aware that there might be deeper water there. But if everything was just ankle deep, you'd be like, great, whew, I can turn my guard off. Because ankle deep water is fun and it's relatively safe. You go into knee-deep water, you have to, especially when it's flowing like a river, you have to position yourself differently. Ankle deep, you're like, yeah, you can do whatever, dance, move around. When it's up to my knees, I've got to space myself and get a pretty good stance, because if I'm just slightly off balance, the current is going to move me and I'm going to have to like slip, or if there's slick rocks underneath me, I've got to be careful about it, because the power of the water, the way that it flows, it could take me out, even at ankle deep. But by the time you get up to waist, of course, the water's going up, but there's like these natural like parts of our bodies that like respond even more intensely to the cold water flowing down. And you're like, whoa, not only am I reaching those points of the water, but it's so stinking deep. Like I'm probably having to paddle to keep my feet underneath me. This is deep water. And the water at these depths begins to exercise its power, its influence in greater measure, where I probably am starting to look a little bit like a fool in waist-deep water. You see me from the shore, I'm not like splashing and playing like ankle deep. I look like I'm trying to keep my cool and hold it together, but I probably still look a little bit silly because I'm trying so hard to keep it together. Sometimes in waist-deep water, the best thing to do is just go all the way in and let it go up to your neck and just float. He measured off another 1,000. But now, it was a river that I could not cross because the water had risen and was deep enough to swim in. There's a point where the water depth, the presence of the Lord, is so deep, I can't maintain control in it any longer. And all I can do is surrender to the water. In my African-American friend church, that point right there, they were like, "Ooh, come on, bring it." Because there was this anticipation. So I think so many times we'd prefer playing in the presence of the Lord in the ankle deep and the knee deep or whatever. We may have worked out enough gymnastics or natural ability to be able to find safe places to play in the presence of the Lord. But I think, look at how the text goes on from here. He asked me, "Son of man, do you see this?" And again, I don't think that this angelic being is trying to get Ezekiel just to simply see, but to understand. He led me back to the bank of the river, and when I arrived there, I saw a great number of trees on each side of the river. So notice that it's not until the water gets deep enough where I can't have control in it any longer, where the miraculous provision of fruit and trees is. Like, I think we want the Lord to show up, to provide for us, to be miraculous, but when we play it safe, we don't really need him. We can play in the water, we can have fun. We can invite the whole church to come play in the water. We could go to the knee deep. Maybe we're that kind of church. We're not ankle deep. We're knee deep folk around here. We still hold our integrity together and we don't do those other things that those people wade. But see, notice like a lot of times we're just trying to manufacture, maintain, control, look good on the other side of it. But as I see this text, and I think what this angelic being is trying to get Ezekiel to see, it's not until the water is deep enough that you can't control anything that you actually see the Lord beginning to do some provision stuff. So you could write this down. Water is stronger the deeper you go. The text goes on from there. This is 8 and 9. And he said to me, this water flows down the eastern region and goes down into the Arabah, where it enters the Dead Sea. When it empties into the sea, the salty water there becomes fresh. Swarms of living creatures will live wherever the river flows. There will be large numbers of fish because this water flows there and makes the salt water fresh. So where the river flows, everything will live. I don't think I've got more text there. It's hard to understand what that means. The water's doing what it naturally does. It does technically defy some physics at this point. It's taking turns that aren't natural. Ultimately, where it lands, though, in the Dead Sea, we do recognize this, right? This is the lowest place on the whole entire earth. My African-American friends were already following where I was leading with that. Come on. The presence of the Lord flowing from the temple left the building and went to the very lowest places on the earth. That sounds like Jesus to me. He went to the last, to the lost, to the lonely. He pursued those people. He didn't, oh, I can't be near you. He wasn't worried about like him losing his holiness and being unclean by touching things that were unclean. He changed those who were unclean and made them clean. Because he went to the lowest places like we see the water doing here. And then look at the crazy transformation. Anybody been to the Dead Sea before? Awesome. I've seen pictures. Did you get in the water, Kristen? Did you get in the water? Yeah. Tell us a little bit, what was it like? I've only seen pictures so I could describe it, but what did it feel like?
You can't turn over. Once you got in trouble, you're not allowed to splash.
There's rules there.
So
Yeah.
you have to just
Yeah.
because you can't, there isn't any like, it's not normal water where you're
Yeah.
splashing around or swimming or I can't get my feet down.
Yeah. My daughter, when she was there, had pictures of the beaches and the salt, you know, as it's drying, has just all these jagged like areas. And she said that it was hard on her feet to walk on some of those spaces as well. And so I think we know this, but let me just kind of unpack this further to make sure that we're getting some clarity on this. This lowest place on the earth, one of the reasons why you float in it, like Devin described, and it's not like normal water in so many ways, is because the salt content is so high because this river or this lake doesn't have an outlet. It receives water and it receives salt and it retains it all. It never leaves from there. And so therefore, the salt water is so high, not only can you not really swim in it, and not only are there rules you can't splash in it, but there's no life in it. It's called the Dead Sea because it's too salty for life to come to. Then notice what happens. The water flows there, it touches the Dead Sea, and it changes the Dead Sea. The place where fish can't live, where life can't flourish, ends up turning into this abundant kingdom location where the king and his rule of multiplication, his reign of goodness and flourishing is turning the salty waters into fresh water, and not only fresh, but incredibly abundant water. Large numbers of fish because the water flows there and makes the salt water. Everything lives there. Again, I mean, this is exactly what it's like. This king that we serve and his kingdom, this is what it brings. And so again, you can write that phrase down. Water brings life to the lowest places. I wonder too if, I'm thinking about our SWOT analysis, and the report outs that we have. I wonder if, not so much that we ignore the bad stuff and focus on the good stuff, but I'm wondering if maybe our SWOT analysis isn't in the situation that it's in because we're not attentive to the low places. Now, I get it. If your church is planted in a really wealthy community, serving a really wealthy group of people, there still are very deep low places in those lives. I don't think it changes things. But I think a lot of times we look at economics as like low versus high. It's just, what are the low places? Yeah. Where might the Spirit of God be calling the church to go? And the church is like, I don't want to go there. I know we have homelessness issues in our areas. I know everybody starts to give attention there. And I'm not trying to say ignore that. That may be one of the low places, but and sometimes in church circles, it almost becomes trendy to start focusing on that. I just think your facility, your community, your spiritual family, there are low places in your area. Do you drive by them? Like Jerry was talking about in his testimony, in 30 days, it's not that it took 30 days, but over the course of 30 days, seeing the level of difficulty in the courtroom, seeing what it looked like driving on train, from his house into Portland. He was seeing the low places. What did the low places do? The Spirit of God called him into action. What are the low places in your area? Because the Spirit of God loves to bring life there. So then I'll just close that segment with, I do think that the Lord wants you to, if there was a specific scenario, like my Honda Accord moment, I think that the Lord wants to take you back there to that place and let you play in the ankle deep water that you're used to, or the knee deep water, but I think He wants to take you deeper. I do think that by His Holy Spirit, there's greater revelation that He wants to show you about that moment that He had with you. Let me try that one more time. It's already had a big impact upon you, and it may rank in your list really highly. That's good. I think that the Lord has way more that He brought into that encounter with you that He still wants to show you. He had that encounter with you. I think that whatever level you've experienced that at, He has even more that He wants to show. Because He's just as invested in that moment. No, not just as. He's way more invested in that moment than even you are. So here's a couple questions to reflect on, and then we'll do some Swedish. Has your church settled for anything less than living water? Does the life within your church have an outlet? Does the water flow out? The presence, the people flow out? Is your church struggling for control in ankle, knee, or waist deep water? Has your church learned to surrender control in the water that's so deep, like we don't know how to function there? What are the lowest places that your church is drawn to? I had a great conversation last nightish with Henry, and we were talking about his ministry as he goes onto campuses, and he used some specific language about one of the college campuses in my area, SWAC, Southwestern Oregon Community College. And he said, sounds like we need to do a prayer journey there. And I knew it was a loaded statement. Prayer journey wasn't just his language. He was trying to say, we need to pray there. But it was really cool, and I was thinking about that a lot more as a specific strategy to discern, Lord, where are you drawing us to the low places? So I won't try to retell prayer journey. You should talk to Henry and ask him about it. If that question really is catching your attention, it'd be a great way to practice discerning as a community, where's the Lord drawing us to? All right, give you 1 minute. What's the Lord catching your attention with as we look at Ezekiel 47?